Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the SEMC May virtual program titled More Than Meets the Eye, Accessibility in Art and Exhibitions. My name is Zinnia Willits, and I am the Executive Director of the Southeastern Museums Conference. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a light-skinned white female with shoulder-length reddish-brown hair, which I let go curly today due to the high humidity down here. I'm wearing black-rimmed glasses that are often referred to as cat eye style, and today I'm wearing a white sleeveless blouse and have a virtual background up with the SEMC logo on a desktop computer. A warm welcome to all of our members joining us today, as well as those who may be new to SEMC. SEMC is a regional professional organization representing museums and museum staff in the 12 southeastern states, as well as in the US Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. We have a membership of around 1,500 and continue to grow. I'm pleased to continue our 2021 virtual program series with this talk focused on accessibility work being done at the Savannah College of Art and Design. First, a huge thank you to Aaron Banks of Banks Creative, today's program sponsor, and the talent behind promotional graphics for SEMC. Aaron is also a graduate of the Savannah College of Art and Design, which is another terrific connection. Also, thank you to the Gaylord and Dorothy Donnelly Foundation for the significant support they have provided to SEMC over this past year to make these programs possible and allow us to keep them free for all to attend. A few housekeeping notes before I introduce our speakers. This session is being recorded and will be available on the SEMC YouTube channel by the end of the week. Closed captioning is available for today's program. You can turn it on via the CC button at the bottom of your screen and make sure to enable the auto transcription feature. A written transcript of today's session will also be available as soon as we can get it edited. I'm certain there will be many questions for our speakers, and I encourage you to put them in the Q&A box so we can keep track and address them at the end of the program. While this is a Zoom webinar and your cameras are off, you're all still here, and I encourage you to speak freely and engage with your colleagues in the chat, which will not be captured in the recording. As I have said many times before, while the C in SEMC stands for a conference, it also stands for community, and it's nice to have all of you here today. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers. First, we have Dr. Christian Carr, who is the Associate Chair of the Art History Department at the Savannah College of Art and Design, where she also teaches in the Museum Studies program. Christian started her career at the National Gallery in Washington, D.C., went on to work with the collections at Biltmore House, and used the Metropolitan Museum of Art as the basis for her master's degree. She earned her PhD while serving as director of a college museum focused on 19th century decorative arts, and is an alumna of the Royal Collection Studies program based at Windsor Castle, as well as the Addingham, Mesda, and Victorian Society summer schools. Next, I'm pleased to introduce Caitlin Rabold, the coordinator of accommodation services at Savannah College of Art and Design. Caitlin is a certified rehabilitation counselor and received a master's in rehabilitation counseling and clinical mental health counseling from the Pennsylvania State University. Before starting her career at Scad, Caitlin worked as a vocational rehabilitation counselor for the Pennsylvania Bureau of Blindness and Visual Services. In this role, she assisted individuals with blindness and visual impairments in enhancing their independence and helped her clients break down access barriers in their workplace, schools, and communities. Caitlin's professional passions include inclusive and universal design, assistive technology, and self-advocacy. Our final speaker today is Rafael Gomez, the Director of Fashion Exhibitions for Savannah College of Art and Design. Rafael is based at Scad FASH, the Museum of Fashion and Film, which is right here in Atlanta. Before joining Scad, Rafael was an archivist and exhibition coordinator at Vivian Westwood, where he oversaw the coordination and styling of global fashion shows, videos, and fashion shoots. He also designed, planned, and executed large-scale exhibitions at numerous world-renowned museums and galleries, including the Victorian Albert Museum and the Palace of Versailles. You can learn more about our presenters from their full bios, which I will post in the chat shortly. I'm so thankful for the time each has devoted to this session, And now I'm pleased to turn the floor over to Christian, Caitlin, and Rafael to begin the presentation.
Well, thank you so much, Zinnia, for that warm welcome. Hello to all of you, and thank you so much for being here and your interest in this topic. Today, I am wearing a lime green cardigan over a black t-shirt and a gold necklace made of large loops. Like Zinnia, I have shoulder-length reddish hair, and today I'm wearing red reading glasses. And so I'd like to really thank Zinnia for her leadership of SEMC over this most extraordinary period of time. When a place for museum professionals to come together and learn from one another has been more critical than ever. These virtual programs have filled a real need for knowledge and for fostering community during a time of isolation and uncertainty. And I think we're all seeing the possibilities of virtual programming in the future as we begin to return to the new normal. Of course, I'd also like to thank my colleagues, Caitlin and Rafael, for joining me. I continue to learn from them, and I'm so excited that you all will have the opportunity to do the same. They really are our main stars for today's session about how the classrooms and galleries at our university meet the needs of visually impaired students and visitors. So I'll take a few minutes at the beginning of our session to share with you why, as a department of art history, we started thinking about accessibility for those with vision impairments, and how we were able to implement accessibility into our classes in an effective manner, thanks in no small part to the support we received from Caitlin and her office, which handles the accommodations our students may need to be successful in their studies. Because at Scad, we like to think of our campus spaces as learning laboratories. And because we're fortunate to have a system of museums and galleries to facilitate dynamic modes of learning, we're also fortunate to have as colleagues, curators like Rafael, who joined us with a keen sense of the possibilities for implementing accessibility in our museum environment. And as Zinnia mentioned at the end, any of the three of us will be happy to take your questions. And so quickly, I'll share with you Scad's mission. Throughout the university, we prepare talented students for creative professions through engaged teaching and learning in a positively oriented university environment. Talent, as you know, takes many forms. It's certainly not one size fits all. And we pride ourselves in creating the conditions that our students need to thrive in their studies, whatever those may be. In the art history department, we are uniquely situated to address a myriad of needs and to provide our students with a spectrum of learning opportunities. We're the largest teaching faculty in the country. There are 55 full-time art historians, all with PhDs, working over their 3 campuses, plus our e-learning classes. We have a master's program. We offer a BFA major, as well as a minor in art history and a minor in museum studies. And as a department, we serve about 2,000 students each quarter in classes that are capped at 30. So art history, to my mind, is really the story of art, but it's also the art of looking. And so I chose this image showing a student using a magnifying glass so she can see this reproduction of the page of the Book of Kells even better. Because what if your student or a visitor to your museum can't see at all? As a department of art historians, a discipline based on looking, our basic entry point is an exercise called the visual analysis. We've had to learn how to connect with students with no or low vision and integrate them fully into our classroom experience. And it's a challenge, but like with most things, with collaboration and planning, we found a way forward. But first we learned we had to teach the teachers. Because like curators, many art historians are specialists. We have a vocabulary specific to our fields, but as educators, we're also communicators, just like the educators on your staffs. We just had to learn to communicate differently, to break down the approach to an artwork to its most basic components. We had to learn to describe rather than analyze. And we harnessed the power of the group to serve students enrolled in our survey of art history classes in the 2020-2021 academic year. For the first time, we had students with no or low vision in our classrooms. Now, the textbook that we used for this particular class is seen on the left-hand side. It was in the beta phase or pre-publication, meaning that the text itself was ready, but the typical features supporting accessibility had not yet been developed. And so for each of the illustrations in this textbook, a full description had to be generated. And there were a lot of images in this textbook, over 500. Fortunately, the same descriptions generated for alt text could be imported into the lecture slides the professor was using in the classroom. But uniformity in those descriptions was key, so a firm editorial hand and guidelines were needed. Caitlin will talk more about that process, and I'm also happy to answer specific questions at the end of our session. But at Scad, it's not just about what happens when a student is seated in a classroom or in a Zoom room, as has been more recently the case. Because at Scad, learning is not confined to the classroom. And that's why creative, capable, and compassionate curators like Rafael are so critical to foster the same sense of inclusion in the galleries that our students feel within the classroom. Because in addition to the bountiful cultural resources in the cities of Savannah, Atlanta, and Lacoste, our campus in France, there's a constant connection between what happens in the museums and in the classroom. So that's shown in this floor plan of the Scad Museum of Art located in Savannah. The 65,000 square foot of gallery space on the ground floor is matched by the same amount of footage on the second floor dedicated to classrooms. And so there's a constant circulation between those two spaces dedicated to learning. And I'm showing you here a view of the Scad Museum of Art, which you can see is an extremely long building. It was repurposed from a former 19th century railroad terminal. So you can imagine a railroad taking up this space and the train fitting under those arches. And so benches to accommodate weary visitors or those who might have invisible disabilities are very important throughout those spaces. And as a result of the fall class on museum leadership, which included units on diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion, this is one of the textbooks that we used. My museum studies class also assessed the Scad Museum of Art and its facilities with an eye towards how accessible they were. And so you can see here, a student is showing the scale of the wall text used in the current installation of our Helen Frankenthaler prints, considerably larger than is typical in museums, but designed to serve our students with or visitors with low vision. In conclusion, to my part, I also wanted to alert you if accessibility for blind patrons is something that is of particular use for you. I have every confidence that you will find information presented by Caitlin and Rafael that are useful to you in your goals for your institution. But there will also be a session at the upcoming AAM annual meeting dedicated to this same topic. And so thank you for listening to this introduction. Again, I'll be delighted to take questions at the end. And at this point, I would like to turn things over to Caitlin, our accommodation specialist.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to take a moment and share my screen really quick. All right. Give me one moment. Put that in presentation mode, maybe. There we go. All right. As mentioned, my name is Caitlin. I am a white female and I have brown pulled back hair. I have large rim gray glasses and I'm wearing a black top that has some white embroidery on it. And so, as mentioned, I am the coordinator of accommodation services at Scad. It's been quite a journey so far at Scad, and it's really an amazing opportunity to work with so many creative students, staff, and faculty members. And before I came to Scad, I was working for government counseling. And so SCAD has been quite a leap for me and it's been really an amazing experience. And so what I'm going to be talking to you all about today, there's a few components, just providing some basic framework as to why accessibility is important. And so some of these laws you may have already heard about or learned about, but I will provide a refresher or new information, whatever fits your needs. And then I'll be going into kind of some aspects about museum accessibility, art education accessibility, and then we'll be providing some demonstration and showing you all a little bit about what we did to accommodate our students this year in art history with visual needs. So, and then I will hand it off to Rafael, and he is going to provide some information about how all of this can be brought together into a museum exhibit. So really neat presentation for you all today. So I'm going to start with the boring stuff, the laws, because they're important and they're necessary. And I feel like in presentations with my staff, get stuck with the laws. And so this is kind of my passion area, but I won't bore you too much with them. But basically, there are two laws. There are so many laws that apply to disability community, disability advocates, and accessibility, but there's two that you'll hear most often when speaking about accessibility, especially in public places and places of higher education. That's the Americans with Disabilities Act in 1990, and when I refer to it, I'll probably be referring to it as the ADA. And then Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, which I'll be calling short 504. All right, so both of these laws are basically saying that there is a requirement to provide equitable access to individuals with disabilities in all services, programs, and activities offered by businesses, institutions, public entities, you name it. And so the Americans with Disability Act is a federal civil rights statute designed to remove barriers that prevent qualified individuals with disabilities from enjoying the same opportunities as anybody else. And then 504 prohibits discrimination based on disability in any program or activity offered by an institution receiving federal funds. So that's really important because most higher education institutions receive some kind of federal funds. So they are, students are protected under 504 and entitled to accommodations under both ADA and 504. So that's some fun facts about laws. So now I want to go into some specifics on ADA and museum accessibility. And I will go into, because obviously this is a lot of facts that I did not make up out of my own head. And so I do have a slide full of resources where I pulled a lot of this information from. And there is, if you want to learn more about the laws and how the laws apply to maybe where you work or your students or your patrons, there's a lot of information out there. And this is just kind of a brief overview. So ADA and museum accessibility. So ADA impacts all aspects of museum and educational operations. And so as Professor Carr mentioned, there are accessibility of the patrons there, the staff there, are you showing videos? Do you have a place where individuals with chronic health needs or mobility needs can sit? Can the patrons read your print? Can they hear your print? It impacts all different aspects of the museum experience. And a lot of times, I have these conversations about when you talk about ADA, the word like mandate or requirement or compliance might get thrown out. But, as a disability advocate and as people in the disability community, it's really what we want people to see is that it's a statement about inclusiveness. And it's not like, oh, I have to do this because the ADA says I need to. It's because it's creating an inclusive environment and creating an equitable experience for everybody so that everybody can enjoy the amazing exhibits or curriculum that the world is offering. So it's not as much a mandate, although it is a mandate and it is a requirement, and that's important to know, but it's also, how can I provide the most inclusive opportunity possible? And how can I create something that reaches the most broad population and make everybody feel welcome? And so museums are public gathering spaces, and they do have public attendance. And so they do have a requirement to adhere to the ADA. And I'll provide you all some information about the ways that you all can do that, and some resources as well, in particular to the blind and visual impairment community. So providing access also becomes key to museum success, because like I mentioned, if you are thinking about the most needs possible, then you're going to get a wider audience range, and you're going to get more people wanting to experience and explore your exhibits because it resonates with them and they have access to them. So it can contribute to the success of a museum. And so the key method, which I know Rafael is going to provide some actual tangible, visuals for how you can do this, but it's creating kind of a multi-sensory experience for your patrons. And so creating alternate ways of experiencing exhibitions and programs, such as having interpreters available, or audio descriptions, or tactile exhibits, and closed captioning on videos. So you're once again designing for the needs of all, not just the needs of few. And of course, there's a lot more examples for how that can be done as well. So this is an image I use in my trainings all the time. I love it. I'll make sure to describe it a bit for you all. But basically, it's the differences in supports. And so we have 3 images here. The first image, so in all images, we have 3 individuals watching a soccer game. Okay, well, I assume there's a goal. So it's a soccer game. And then in the first 2 images, there is a fence that is a barrier between the individuals and the soccer field. And so we have 3 individuals. One is a tall male, one is maybe a shorter female, and then one is an individual in a wheelchair. Okay, and so the equity, so if we're thinking about just equitable support, so we're just going to provide this one accommodation. It should serve basically everybody. It's equitable supports. So everybody has the same size box in order to view the soccer game over the fence. So it says in this first image, it's assumed that everybody will benefit from the same supports. So they're all being treated equally. And so the second image, it's kind of shuffled a bit. And so the tall individual can see over the fence fine because of their height. The second individual that may be a little bit shorter now has 2 boxes so that that individual can see over the fence. And then the third individual that is in a wheelchair has a wheelchair ramp so that they can see over the fence. So everybody is getting the supports that they need individually, and their individual needs are being addressed and accommodated so that they all can see the soccer game. And then the third is my favorite. This is completely removing the barrier in itself so that supports are not necessary. So the third image is all 3 individuals can see the game without accommodations because the systemic barrier has been removed. So that is where you look at inclusive design, universal design. It's just going ahead and designing your exhibits and your museums and your education, thinking about the needs of all. And so that's just a really important visual, just kind of showing the differences in supports and how supports are viewed. Okay, so this is what we'll be talking more specifically about in my section, is accessibility in art education, because we're in a higher education setting. So what I love to hit home on is striving beyond compliance. Like I said, we have the ADA, we have 504, we have these non-discrimination laws, which provide equitable support. It does evaluate individuals on an individual level. But why not go beyond that? Why not strive beyond compliance so that the students or the individuals feel welcome and they go into their class or into the museum on their first day and really be like, wow, this is amazing. I can access this, I can access that. I don't have to approach an individual to ask for support because this exhibit or this classroom or this curriculum is designed for all. And it has these elements of universal design and inclusive design already embedded before I come in. So it's really striving beyond that to create an inclusive environment for individuals. And like I said, there's two big components with that: universal design and inclusive design. And the key component of these, like I've already mentioned, is providing information and exhibits in multiple formats. So audio, tactile, like Braille, visual, providing things in multiple formats so that people with a wide variety of needs can access them. If you are working in a higher education setting, like Professor Carr mentioned, collaborating with your disability resource offices. Those are the in-house experts. That's our job. We live and breathe accommodations and accessibility every single day. I talk about this collaboration with art history department all the time because it's been incredible. And it's really given the university an opportunity to see how we can collaborate for the greater good, and for accessibility and for inclusion. And so definitely tap into that resource because they're your experts. Also providing proactive supports instead of reactionary supports. And so sometimes you're not going to be able to help it. And so if you have, there may be an individual that steps into your museum or steps into your class and you're like, oh my gosh, I've never thought about accommodating this specific need. Or, my class isn't really set up for this, but what can I do to help you? And how can we modify this and adjust this for your needs? But the more proactive supports that can be put in place, such as elements of universal design, having multiple, mediums and multiple formats of your information, those are things that can be proactively embedded in your exhibits and in your classrooms in order to reduce the amount of supports that need to be put in reactionarily. And of course, the student or the individual that is at your museum is the expert on their own needs. And so not being afraid to have discussions with them of how can I best support you? Can you access this? Are you doing okay? And so those are the experts, is the individual with the disability themselves. So there are some specific considerations to think about when supporting individual with visual needs. And so I've mentioned some of these already, and some of them may seem a little bit obvious, but audio guides and descriptions, Braille labels, like Professor Carr mentioned, large print labels, because individuals with visual needs have a variety of vision or vision loss. And so accommodating for, large print and audio is very important. And also knowing, I'm going to skip to the last bullet point because it's really important, is that knowing that not every individual with blindness or visual impairment are alike. So I know I'll be asked like, oh, okay, so if I just put Braille up here, that's good, right? Like I should be fine with just Braille. And it's like, no. Not every individual with blindness can read Braille. It's a language in itself, just very similar to not every individual who's deaf can communicates through ASL. And so it's understanding those different needs and that everybody's an individual. And also I know recently our Scad Museum of Art, just a couple days ago, held a specific tour. It was an ASL tour, and this was really neat. They partnered with interpreters and offered a designated time for individuals to come and get an ASL tour of the museum. So I really love this idea of, providing visual description tours, providing ASL tours, and just making those, kind of creating an option for those communities to go through and receive, a nice guided tour in the way that they communicate. And of course, as I mentioned, multisensory museum exhibits and experiences. And what's really important is training your staff and training your faculty, if you're in education, on how to support individuals with visual or sensory needs, and also just individuals with disabilities. They're just providing disability awareness and trainings is so important. So if you do, because you will, I know at Scad, we just ran numbers recently, 25% of the Scad student population has accommodations and has a self-reported disability. And so that's a large population. So we know training for faculty and staff is so important because without a doubt, they are going to have students with disabilities in their classrooms, and they need to know how to accommodate it, the students' rights, the student responsibilities. So that is a proactive support that you can put in place, is just staff and faculty awareness and trainings. Okay, so these are the resources that I've used to kind of compile some of this information, but also these are incredible resources just for general, if you want to learn more about supporting individuals with blindness and visual impairments. Art Beyond Sight is amazing. This is the key for where I get most of my information. It is a nonprofit organization that is dedicated to making visual arts accessible for people with blindness and visual impairments. They have trainings, webinars, workshops. They'll do an individual consultation of museums. So they'll go into a museum, or you can provide like a video of your museum, and they'll provide you with with feedback on things that you could do to improve your accessibility for people with blindness and visual impairments. And also the National Federation for the Blind and American Federation for the Blind are wonderful resources as well. So I'm going to hop and just quickly show you all. I'm going to stop my screen share for a moment because I'm going to provide a demonstration or just a view of what we did. I'm going to stop my share and I'm going to reshare it of what we did as a university to help accommodate our students with visual impairments in our art history course. So we are a university that uses Microsoft 365. And so that's important to know because we used Microsoft OneNote for this particular project. And so this was our attempt and we got really great feedback from the students who used it. But as Professor Carr mentioned, we were using a textbook that had not been published yet, so it had not gone through the accessibility filters. So we had to figure out as a university, okay, how are we going to make this accessible for individuals with visual impairments? And there, obviously, art history has a lot of images in the textbooks. And with using a book that had not gone through the phase that had alternative text, we had to figure out how to describe these images to our students. And in a way that it wasn't just like, this is, I've experienced a lot of alt text, and alt text is so important and it's vital to the accessibility for individuals with visual impairments, but also, it's short. It's supposed to just be short descriptive text. So we wanted to make sure that our students were getting that engaged, like Professor Carr mentioned. Our mission at Scad is positively oriented, engaged educational opportunities. So we wanted to make sure our students were engaged with this text and engaged with the pieces of art that were in the text. And so what we did is we asked our amazing faculty and Professor Carr was an absolute superhero with this and helped and divided up these images for our faculty members in order to get these really robust descriptions so that our students could really connect with the pieces and with the images in here and could understand, in a way that they could critically analyze them and be able to describe them to somebody else and be able to just really resonate with this text. And so what we're looking at here is a OneNote digital binder. So you can see, and I'm just going to provide a quick description of this. The colors here, so it is broken down into every chapter of the textbook. And so we have here tabs that have, these are sections, and then these are pages. And so the sections are each individual chapter, and they're color coded by the unit that the professor was teaching. All right, and so we had yellow was unit 1, green was unit 2, and blue was unit 3. Because as we mentioned, we had students with a variety of visual needs in this course. And so then once you click on the chapter or the section right here, you get every image that is in that chapter. And then once you click on the image, and of course the image is labeled in the textbook, then you get the robust, amazing description that our faculty members created. You get a PDF because we had some students that, they just weren't really into the digital binder, and that's fine. And so if they weren't into navigating the digital binder, even though it's accessible, they just wanted to download the PDFs and create their own folders on their own computer. So that's great because, once again, this is a tool that we tried to create for all, not just for one avenue. So they could choose to navigate these descriptions through the digital binder, or they could download it themselves. And I provided an example. Our ultimate goal was to have a description, the image, the PDF, and the audio recording. This was a huge goal. And so we, got to the point where every single chapter had the PDF, the description, and the image. The audio descriptions is a work in progress. And so it's something, but with working with this textbook company, we had some amazing meetings with them. And with working with the textbook company, we kind of articulated the importance of audio descriptions and having audio components. And they, from last conversations, they're picking up, audio descriptions and audio formats of their textbooks, and it'll be included in the finalized version, which is amazing because we had talked about how, text-to-speech, once again, an amazing tool, but sometimes our students and just individuals who use it on a regular basis, it can be a little robotic because it's not humans that are speaking the text. And so it can get a little monotonous. And for some students with processing, they might not be able to process information in that kind of tone. And so this textbook company is actually considering using human voices for their audiobook, which is just incredible. And so that was our goal here. And definitely something we would like to continue to develop is, this audio recording that is in this page right here is my voice reading this. And so it's I try to do it at a pace that is friendly for all, but of course, within this feature, you can increase the pace, you can slow the pace and all that. So this was kind of our initiative that we took on, and to create an inclusive and kind of universal experience for our students with visual impairments in art history. And it was just really well received, an amazing project for our faculty to be engaged in. A lot of great conversations stemmed from this, and just really neat opportunity here. So and if you have any more questions, I know I kind of did, I could spend hours on just this alone. So as Professor Carr mentioned, we will have our information handy. So if you ever want to consider something like this, I am open to further conversations and discussions, because this was a really neat initiative that we could spend a lot of time going over. So I'm happy to talk individually with you all as well. So great. So that was really what I had today. So I will hand it off to Rafael.
Thank you, Caitlin. Yes, my name is Rafael Gomez, and I'm from multiracial origin. My mother is German. My father, yes, his grandparents, my grandmother was an enslaved African woman, and my great-grandparent was the Portuguese, the owner of this woman. And I still carry the name actually from the master family, Gomes. My grandmother from father's side was indigenous, and yes, myself, I look Middle Eastern. I have olive skin, I have a black beard, black hair. Today I'm wearing a blue jacket, just a white t-shirt, and some gold reading glasses. I was born in Brazil, Rio de Janeiro, and when I was 18, I moved to Germany, and where I studied. And later I moved to London. The last 10 years, I lived in London, and I used to work for Vivienne Westwood. And I was like the person for everything, and I was there for so long. I used to work in exhibitions, but I used also to work in fashion shows, press office. If a sales assistant was ill, I would go to the shops and work in the shops. And yes, and once we got a request, let me share the screen. I can show you some visuals while I'm talking about it. Just a second. Oh, I think everybody can see it. Or here you go. Yes, we got a request to dress with archive pieces entire opera. It was an opera, similar work by Handel. It started in Hanover in Germany. We traveled with this project to Seoul, and the last one was during the Sydney Festival in 2013. It was a huge project. We dressed the entire opera in Vivienne Westwood archive pieces. Here you can see the extent of the project. There were some very iconic pieces from Westwood on stage, and we produced also some new pieces for this opera, something with very amazing new technology materials. As you can see here on the very corner, the lady with the feathers on the head. This material was called woven air. It's something very thin that it's produced in Japan. It's so thin that it's literally floaty. It's an incredible material when the person is in movement. And yes, it was part of this opera was the visual appealing to the entire production. And we got a request during fittings that there was a group of visual impaired and blind people in Sydney that was coming to see or to be at the opera, and they would like to come and view the costumes to have an idea what is going on stage. And it was like, oh my God, how can we now accommodate such a request in such a little time? And after convincing my boss, and she's saying, okay, don't let anyone touch anything that's white, we got it approved. And we have this big group coming to view the costumes. And this was so touching for me. This was such a special experience. It stayed with me. And I just thought to myself, like, I hope we can repeat this one day. And yes, and things change, life move on, and I end up at Scad, working as a curator. Then very early on, when our museum opened, we are open now since 5 years, we had an exhibition coming from the Victorian and Albert Museum in London. The exhibition was called Shoes, Pleasure and Pain. This exhibition was curated in London and traveling the world. And Atlanta was one of the stops. Here we have an image of the exhibition, of course, like with these antique objects coming from London, and we could not touch any of the objects when they were being installed. We have 3 art preparators coming from London to install the exhibition. And but every museum was allowed to create one area that they would create literally whatever they wanted. The majority of the museums, they had shoes on display from socialites from the city or the country that the exhibition was at this point. Personally, I thought socialites are out. People want something more real, heroes, or yeah, something that it's more real. And then I came back to the experience that I had in Sydney, and I thought we could create something that we will allow visual impaired or blind people to come to the museum. And how can we do this? At the first was like, it's impossible. We cannot display anything from the permanent collection because people will touch. And one of the solution was, okay, let's find a budget, buy some objects, or resemble the ones that will be on display or copies. And so they are not from the permanent collection. And then after, we see what we can do with these objects. And we went with those ideas. We got a budget. It wasn't much. We got together $2,500. And from this budget, we start buying objects. We found many on eBay. Some objects, they were really like original ones, and others, they were replicas. So we could create our area. Moving on here, we can see one of the deliverers from the Victorian Albert Museum. Oh, and these incredible boxes, all very packed. This is our museum. Here are the two areas that we were able to create ourselves. All the rest was, of course, very low levels of light, everything behind glass, very secure. And then with the budget, and yeah, we start buying objects that would resemble what was on the exhibition, but also what would be interesting to touch, interesting to talk about. We can tell the story of humanity through shoes. It's very interesting. And yes, here we have some examples of the pieces that we bought from men's shoes from the 70s, snow shoes, here incredible winter boots in fur. Then we have here tribal boots, botas tribaleras from Mexico, some very modern shoes from the 2010s, like the Gaga shoes with no heels, Lotto shoes, original ones though. Then we got some donations from designers. We have here also like Japanese tango gaiters, then padukas from India. We have here fetish shoes. We have shoes from the 19th century, replicas from armor shoes. And at the end, we had more than 50 pieces on display. And it was a fantastic experience. We would also provide masks for people that would want to have a experience of discovering the objects through touching. This was also very interesting. And we had the second part in the exhibition that we create a shoe shop. We could show how shoes would be originally made by artisans before industrialization. Here you can see we had a student demonstrating how you would create the shoes on top of lasts. And this student now, an Alon, he created shoes himself. The shoes here that being exhibited are the shoes that he created. Here you can see the lasts. You can also see all the instruments and the tools that were used to create shoes. And it was an incredible experience to see how shoes were made. Here we have a bird view. We can see some of the tools, the nails, the polishment, how they would polish the leather. It was very interesting. And here was a curator tour that I gave once. From this area, you can see this area, we had higher levels of light. It was easier to see the objects. We also had always a docent in this area. You can see here the docent holding an iPad. And we would have docents, and we still have docents to accompany guests for special needs or guests that just want a more intense tour of the exhibitions. And the student was always assisting whoever wanted to have this tactile experience. And we had shelves that you could take the shoes, and then you would have always a docent explaining you all the story behind it. And through this section, you could have an idea from what was going on in the entire exhibition. We could tell the same story that the big exhibition was telling from this area. And it was really successful. And here we have a picture with some students holding some of the objects. This enormous boots here, they were donated from Rabold. It's a designer from London. Also those shoes here. And here we have a member holding shoes, boots from Himalaya. and from this area, and the incredible boots constructed in straw and then felt and cotton. It's an incredible piece. And yes, and what we learn as well, it's from this point, we stop printing exhibition guides. We start doing digital guides for our visitors. And it's also more ecological because you're not printing all this paper that after a tour, after going through the museum, they will just drop on a litter box. It's very environmental friendly. It also gives you the possibility to make last minute change. In this case here, for example, every time we would get a new donation, we could have an addition to this area. You could just change your digital guide. And also, it's also easier to read if you have lights from the back, especially if you're in an exhibition like this one here with objects coming from the, I think we had sandals from Egypt, from the 3 centuries BC, and objects that needed a very, very low level of lights. It was a very dark exhibition, and having this digital guides that you can read on your phone, that you can zoom the fonts, it's easier to read. It's I wear glasses myself, and I found that experience amazing, just to be able to zoom the fonts and be able to read it in an easier way than when you go to museums and you have this teeny tiny description of the items. And so we are doing now this for every exhibition. We are having this digital guide, and the next step would be to have audio descriptions. But like Caitlin was saying, it can turn a little bit robotic if you have just a voice reading it. This is why we also offer the service to have docents in the museum. The docents are our own students from Scad. They get intensive training for every exhibition. We do always trainings on Fridays. And before we open the exhibition, we also invite the designer or the artist, or for example, this exhibition that was traveling now, the curators of the exhibition, that they will give our students a special intensive tour. We go literally through every object that's in the exhibition, so our students can speak with authority to our guests because they heard it from the designer, the artist directly. And this it's a very successful method to offer service to anyone that has a different need, or people that just want to have a more intense experience of the exhibition than just going through. And we all notice people don't really stop to read the signs of the pieces, but they will take the time to hear it from someone else. And I see that it's very successful, especially to our students, because they are hearing from other students, and then they have iPads with all visuals that can accompany this explanation. And it's a very successful way. And yeah, I think this is all that I have to say. If yes, I think I will pass it back to Xenia. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you all. It was so interesting, and just thinking differently about these multi-sensory experiences. I have a question for you, Rafael, about, so did you purchased those pieces for the exhibition so that they could become a more tactile way for people to engage? Did you then add them to the permanent collection?
Yes, yes, we could not take anything from the permanent collection and have it out to be touched. We got this budget, and I bought these objects, and then when the exhibition finished, we put it then to the permanent collection. Now they belong to the permanent collection, but before they were just objects bought for the exhibition.
Okay, and then I guess my just follow-up question on that, and sometimes it's difficult to differentiate with visitors in terms of within museums what you can touch and what you can't touch and why. And that's always been a little bit of a tricky business with doing these tactile type of exhibitions. So how did you approach that with your exhibition?
With this exhibition, it was very easy because everything else that came from the Victorian Albert Museum was behind glass. And it was more than safe, and from the glass we needed it still to have like a certain distance. Nothing was accessible at all, and then these areas, it was very obvious that it's accessible. It was just very open and inviting for our visitors. This was easy.
And were you able to get feedback on people's experiences being able to touch something? Because it's, even as a museum person, I walk into a museum all the time and want to touch it, and your brain says, no, don't do that. And so
yes, because we have docents in the areas, the docents, they were always encouraging the visitors to touch the objects, and was very popular, especially with the younger public, for taking pictures with it. Of course, like the selfie moment. And we had people always in these areas incentivizing people to touch. And I think it was, I must say, sometimes it was very emotional. There was once a girl, she was blind, she was deaf, she couldn't speak, she was immersed in a world that she could just communicate through tactile, and when she was touching these objects and there was a translator translating all the story of the objects, I felt very emotional, and it really touched me, and I felt really like we are doing something right, and it's going in the right direction, and we should do it more often. We had big groups coming, and we had sometimes individual visitors, and I think it was very gratifying to have done it, and I think we should do more. It's not always so easy, and everybody that works in museums know it, especially if you're bringing in traveling exhibitions, or you're working with other museums. All these objects, they can't be touched. Sometimes you can have like one day in the week that you have like higher light levels, so it's a bit easier and to be seen, or use larger fonts, or like we always do, we have our docents that can give explanation of the objects. But the tactile experience, it's not always easy to realize, especially if you're working with fragile objects, old objects.
Yeah, but it's so great to be able to provide that on some level, and then have witnessed that type of experience. I guess, and just sort of a final question for Christian and Caitlin, you had to do this shift very quickly to the descriptions. What was your timetable on making that happen for the semester?
It was very quick. As you know, as I kind of mentioned throughout, and I'll have Professor Carr elaborate on this a bit, but with higher education and the ADA, at any single moment with enrollment in classes, and Scad has rolling admissions as well, which makes it really interesting because we're constantly enrolling students. But at any single moment before an add drop period, a student can switch into a professor's class. And so these are conversations we've had a lot with our faculty members, because they'll be like, well, we need, a 6-month notice, or we need a year notice that the student's going to be in our class. It's like, we can't do that. Yeah. Students have equal rights to be able to enroll in any class, just like any other student would. And so it was a relatively quick turnaround. I'll let Professor Carr give the specifics, but it definitely had us sweating a bit, but we did it.
So we knew, because Caitlin's very good about alerting everyone, so we can do what we need to get our ducks in a row. But at the very beginning, you know, the week before the quarter in particular, one's inbox is just exploding. So I saw the message, but I couldn't really wrap my head around it. And really, I knew it was going to take some space that I had to carve out. So it was on me that I kind of really processed everything on a Thursday, and classes started on Monday. So because in leadership, in any role you're in, any level you're in a museum, you know, you can always demonstrate leadership. I took the first set, reached out to our professor who had also been in communication with Caitlin and is incredibly adaptable, flexible, and she was able to, by Saturday morning, generate the first several weeks of images that she would like to show in class. So I took the descriptions that were going to be in the first class, and then you also, as a leader, you know the people that you work with. And so I was able to figure out who would be able to respond quickly and with a minimum amount of fuss to the ask. And then we just sort of, you know, communicated through messaging. Again, we're fortunate because we have a deep bench of faculty members. So everybody that was teaching the first part of survey was alerted that they would be getting a set of artworks every couple of weeks that they needed to turn around and get back to us, because again, we really had to keep the need of the students in mind. So it didn't matter if you had other things that you needed to get to. Class was coming at 8 a.m. on Monday morning, and those descriptions had to be ready. So again, it just was doing what we needed to make it happen, and really having fantastic colleagues. You know, I would sometimes finish editing the batch to the specifications we had determined, you know, Sunday night at 9, and Caitlin would work her magic and get them posted in time for class the next morning.
Yeah, and I think just another plug for the Microsoft Office community is that with using the OneNote, it's all cloud-based. And so the students received live updates when we did that. And so as I was uploading it into OneNote, the student could see it in OneNote. And so the student kind of had a timeline in the students in their own head of like, you should expect your, you know, descriptions for the class by this time. And so, and it was amazing with using this Microsoft OneNote is that the moment I was importing it, they had access to it.
That's really amazing. And I mean, I asked these questions too, just to kind of put it in the context of reality, because university museums often have more resources, but than maybe some of our attendees museums, but it's still a matter of people and time, and committing to doing the work. So I'm sort of in awe of everything that all of you have done to move this forward. My final question is for the next semester. Do you have the process in place now? It's just all rolling, ready to go?
Well, that's the challenge too, is that our faculty have complete latitude to use whatever teaching resources they want. And so it just so happened that we're on the quarter system. So the first class was taught in the fall quarter. The second class was taught in the winter quarter. And it was taught using the set of New Civilizations, sort of art history videos, the set of 9. So that was a slightly different process, in that, and Caitlin could talk a bit more about this, but the videos had the accessibility in them. But our professor who taught that class was much more visually oriented and used the images in a very different way. And so she would be pulling 100 works per week that didn't need the full description because that was in the videos, but we did need to do the alt text for the PowerPoints. Yeah. So yes, one adapts.
Yeah, and I think just because we're trying to kind of, as mentioned in my section, provide proactive supports instead of kind of like this student is in this class, so we need to accommodate this. We as a department do a lot of faculty trainings. A specific, like in our department, we have an assistive technology expert. We have an expert on student, we have a BCBA who is an expert and specialist in working with students on the autism spectrum. So we provide very specific trainings and try to get into department meetings as much as possible to kind of provide these frameworks of, and then we also work a lot with our educational technology team to have accessible trainings on alternative text, captioning, Kaltura, which is our captioning software that we use at Scad. And so there's just a lot of broader conversations so that when the students can take any class and that they, you know, there's less of this like needing to get things rolling really quickly because the supports are already in place. So that's kind of the views that we've been trying to adapt and this kind of proactive approach.
Yeah, it's sort of amazing how quickly though you've been able to implement it in the grand scheme of things. I read somewhere that museums often move at a glacial pace, and I think sometimes universities are the same. But it's really exciting to be able to hear from all of you today. I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up just in the interest of our time. But I thank you so much, Christian and Caitlin and Rafael. I mean, Christian, you and I started talking about this, I don't even know, in November. And so it was wonderful to have this program today and these resources, which for everybody still on the call, we will be sending out the PowerPoints and the resources that Caitlin mentioned. The video recording will also be up probably towards the end of the week if you want to go back and watch it again. And I just very much appreciate all of your time and doing this for SEMC. So thank you for being with us today, and everybody have a great rest of your week.
Thank you for having us.
You're welcome.
Thank you all.